So welcome everyone to our EL community call on how evolutionary media can turn things around. Whew. This is a very large topic, and I want to welcome you all who have come to engage in this important subject today. So we wanted you to meet Joe Martino and find out more about the work that he had done through the platform of collective evolution, and now his new platform at the Pulse.1. Joe is making a real attempt to provide a wide range of perspectives on the news that we get, so that perhaps we're not stuck in one point of view that comes from commercial media. And in thinking about how to create an interesting call for you, we invited Dinan to speak because Stephen has written some very compelling pieces about truth in media over the last, well, let's say this period of COVID particularly. And of course, we are always seeking the wisdom of our beloved Jean Houston. So she will complete our presentations today. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Joe Martino from Canada. Where are you, Joe?
Yeah, we're just north of Toronto by about an hour and a half.
Okay, well, it's great to have you with us today, Joe, and let's hear about your work and this.
Sure, yeah, so obviously this topic of media is a massive discussion. It can go in so many different directions. I sort of stuck to, in sort of preparing a few notes here, the aspects of discerning truth, what that means and what that looks like, as well as some new approaches that are being taken. And I'm going to kind of preface by saying there's a couple of themes here I'm going to bring up. One is the sort of the multidimensional nature of us as beings, which is to say, you know, we're spiritual beings, we're beings that have a mind, we're beings that have tactile bodies that are interacting with a reality around us. You know, we understand that our consciousness does affect our immediate reality as well as, you know, reality around us. We're co-creating, we're collectively co-creating a reality, but there's a physical nature, there's a day-to-day creation nature of the actions that we take that come from the decisions that we make, that come from how we learn about what's going on in the world. And in essence, media to me has always kind of been this, it's an examination of what's going on. And if we bring in a deeper side to that, we might say, let's explore the paradigms or the worldviews that are making the systems, making the societies that we see today around us. So the other two key things I'm going to bring up is a little bit about nuance and a little bit about uncertainty, which are kind of important pieces to this. And I will finally preface by saying, I never grew up wanting to be a journalist or doing anything of that nature. I was just a curious person that was interested in the paranormal, the supernatural, and question the world in a lot of different ways, as I'm sure so many people on this call can relate to. It actually was only until a few years ago that I released the resistance to calling myself a journalist. So it's kind of comical, you know, side note there. But that said, I found that exploring what's going on in the world as a journalist has kind of helped me to understand a way that can bridge gaps between future ideas and future ways of looking at things and where things are right now by understanding ultimately how things function. So in terms of truth and discerning truth, we are in what I think a lot of people are calling, and I would agree with, sort of like a meaning crisis, which is to say, where do we lend our authority? Where do we lend our meaning? Where do we lend our trust to when it comes to institutions in our society? So that might be governing institutions, it might be media, it might be what we call experts, all these different things. And interestingly, we're in a time, and we have been for, I would argue, quite a while, but specifically we see it through COVID, where we're in a time where experts don't necessarily agree. And then you must ask the question, okay, what do we do when experts don't agree? Because now we're kind of in this crisis where, based on the fact that people have seen what's going on with media institutions, whether it be corporate media, whether it be other forms of independent alternative media, they feel there's a lack of trust, right? And that's an earned lack of trust, meaning there's been mistakes so much across the board for so many years, for so long. There's been what we might call lies that have come from government, that have come from media, that people can discern and point out quite easily with the proper investigation. And so because of that, you have this massive lack of trust. So now you have to say, okay, well, how do we know what to do? Where do we go as average citizens when we can't really trust what's going on? And of course, this doesn't come down to, well, there's going to be a single source of media that's going to have it all together, right? There's not going to be, well, the mainstream's not always wrong. The independent or alternative is not always wrong, and vice versa on the right side. It's about building, in my view, and this is kind of the focus we took with our people over the last few years, is building the skills, the techniques, the levels of awareness within the general public that is less about sort of placing a blind faith in what's going on and more about understanding what it is about ourselves that is so keen to want to know something for sure, that is so keen to want to lend trust to something when should there be trust there, right? This is a huge part of, I think, how we discern truth, is understanding and bringing to awareness the mechanisms that we have within ourselves that are determining what is right and what is wrong. And so we've done courses, for example, on critical thinking and bias and overcoming those things, which is very much a personal journey into self, into exploring how our belief systems are formed, and exploring, how much of our lives we're living sort of subconsciously versus being alive, being awake, being here, being aware of what's happening. And those underlying skills become extremely important in how we navigate information around us. And so we've took it upon ourselves as a media organization, when it comes to helping people discern truth, is we want to leave them with a lot of questions. So instead of always saying, well, here's exactly what is happening, we've kind of said, well, how can we say, okay, here's what we're finding, and there's different pieces to the puzzle over here. And instead of saying, okay, certainly here's what's going on, how can we question various aspects of this to get people to say, what is going on? How can I explore this deeply? How can I be inspired, or how can I be encouraged to look at this from a more deep point of view? Because the position of certainty in something is almost impossible to grasp right now. And I would argue that this is kind of where there's sort of a deep disingenuous nature to the state of some independent media, and I would say a lot of mainstream media right now, which is this lending of absolute certainty backed up by fact checking that is typically around topics that they cannot be certain about. But the general feeling is that, well, without certainty, we can't push forward ideas, we can't push forward policies, we can't push forward decisions. So we need to stick to uncertainty. And the challenge is there's an allegiance to existing governing and trustworthy authoritative institutions. And so this is muddying the waters in a lot of different ways on how people are discerning information, because as the independent media side has grown, people have been able to point to problems with a lot of these narratives. And when you point to problems with a lot of these narratives, you get to a point where we now know that things can't be certain, but we have a bias within ourselves as beings to want certainty, right? We want to know exactly what's going on all the time. And to help people, and this is kind of going to the new approach thing a little bit, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get this all out in 10 minutes, but to help people get to a point of being comfortable with uncertainty is a huge portion of how we navigate media and how we navigate what's going on. And we've done a lot of work to try and do this. We've ran a number of surveys with our people. We ran a little bit of an internal study with our people to determine whether or not this was working in the methodologies that we've used over the course of time. And we found that people report that there's a lot of success in helping people feel more grounded, helping people feel more comfortable in uncertainty, helping people navigate the world with fluid minds, with a fluid state of being, as opposed to this rigidity, sticking to identity, sticking to a political side, sticking to a political narrative or agenda. So there are ways to do that. And I can't go into all the ways that how we've designed our media to do that because there's just not enough time. But the general recognition here that I want to get to is that we're in a time where nuance is incredibly important. We have to be able to understand that most of what's happening in our world is not at all black and white. Conspiracy absolutely exists in our world. It's as simple as what happened in Afghanistan. I mean, there was a 20-year war going on in Afghanistan that was premised based on verifiable forms of propaganda that made the people that were behind the scenes calling the shots as to why we should stay in war with Afghanistan was based around ideas that weren't true to what was actually happening on the ground. Yet the story coming back to, the country, if you will, is we need to stay there. We need to be here. Well, that's conspiring, right? Conspiracy is that simple. And so it's upon us right now, I think, to have nuance, to be able to understand how to navigate different forms of media, build up what's going on in terms of how we're working through the various skills and the various pieces of critical thinking and staying present and staying within ourselves to navigate information. These things are all key and I think need to be taught. And I think it's within media's ability, and this is what I think we're living proof of, it's within media's ability to be able to tell a story, be able to build people's internal skills of discerning information, let them be comfortable in uncertainty and invite them into something deeper. And I think these are some of just a high level, some of the approaches that can be taken there. I think my time is about up. There's like a million more things I could say, but that's what came out.
Well, thank you, Joe. That was very, very interesting. And could you just tell us before we move on, tell us a little bit about the Pulse. Who is your audience? How many people do you reach? What kind of interaction do you have with them?
Sure. Yeah. So the very quick story on that is we ran under the brand Collective Evolution for a very long time, trying to do transformation and media at the same time. It was very difficult because sometimes those are two different audiences, although we've built a very large audience who understands that transformation and media and understanding that is an overlap, right? It's all connected. So what we did recently was we split off into the Pulse, which is just going to handle our journalism side. And we essentially provide investigative journalism and analysis on anything from current events, science, consciousness, solutions, all that sort of stuff, but with this deeper inquiry into, what worldviews, what paradigms are ultimately creating our societies around us. So we're asking bigger and deeper questions through current events, and we reach millions of people each month. We're using the network that we've had through Collective Evolution all these years over the last 12, almost 13 years, and we actually have a piece of data that kind of breaks down the whole demographics, but the vast majority of the people that follow us are, I would say, between the ages of, say like 40 and 60, which I know there's a bit of a wide gap, but generally people have looked at us and said, okay, well, your audience is probably just, the really younger generations, which is typically not what we've seen. It's typically people that are a little bit older and a little bit disenfranchised with the state of the world that are looking for something a little bit deeper. And yeah, we've just created a network, I guess, of people that kind of range. They come into our work from a lot of different possibilities, whether it be health and wellness, whether it be transformation, whether it be meditation, whether it be current events, whatever it might be. But through the course of that, we've noticed that no matter what inlet, right, because there's different ways that people become more curious, no matter what inlet, a more holistic approach seems to be where they develop as an audience, meaning they start to see the world a lot more holistically, and they start to connect how our inner world, our inner journey is very much connected to what we see outside. So hope that answered that.
Yes, very much so. Thank you so much. All right, well, let us hear from our next presenter, who will be Stephen Dinan. You all know Stephen as the founder and CEO of the Shift Network, and he's the author of Sacred America, Sacred World, which attempted to give us a more balanced look at our political system in America. And lately he's been blogging about the media. So I'm very interested to hear your views, Stephen Dinan.
Great. Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you all. Great to see everybody. It's been a little while. Been in Kidlandia, so I haven't been doing as much with different network groups or evolutionary leaders. But so what I kind of want to sort of step back and sort of see this from the broadest perspective is like we're at this critical crossroads for humanity. And basically this decade is the one that we have to have major change at scale in order to avert some of the worst case scenarios and crises. And there's pathways that we can really go to a very dark future on this planet. I don't believe that's what we're designed here to do, what we incarnated to do, but I think that that choice point is a kind of serves a kind of forcing function for all of us. And so the question is, how do we help to tip the scales towards that positive evolutionary future? And in this decade and really a couple decades after that, I see this as like we have to install essentially a new operating system for the planet. And the reason I'm involved with Shift and Evolutionary Leaders is I believe that we have the contours of that worldview that Joe was saying. It's holistic, it's global, it's participating in the evolution of the whole. It's decentered from the individual to like embracing the collective evolution of our species. It's there's a lot of different things that all of you are very articulate about really expounding. But the problem right now is that people exist in media ecosystems. And so spending 4 or 5 hours a day, often just within their particular filter bubble. So people might only watch right-wing news, Fox News, they might only watch mainstream sources, they might only be into the different alternative sources. And a lot of those alternative sources, I think, have equal problems, if sometimes even bigger problems than the mainstream sources, because there's a lack of rigor and accountability and actually discernment. It's often deep disrespect for science and journalistic practices. But they're often very good at creating media. And so what's happening is that we need to have a coalescence of this third force, this evolutionary media that becomes a big enough ecosystem that people can spend more of their time in it. So spending 4 or 5 hours a day engaging in content that is sourced from and encouraging people to live in this more holistic, all-embracing, sacred way of being. And that's not a small task. I would say that, realistically, even people who are big fans of a lot of our work, maybe they're spending, 15 minutes a day connecting with a book or an online video or a course that they might doing. And so I think that the biggest task of our day, with Shift Network, we've touched a fair number of people, over 3 million people have participated in something. And we've, got a lot of people who've gone through educational programs. And our aspiration now is to touch 100 million, because the thesis is we need to basically have 1% of the population that starts to embody the new at a sufficient level that they become more magnetic and catalytic and leaders for the whole to make that pivot themselves. And so how do you get 100 million people on the planet to really shift within this decade into this next higher order worldview that's more integrative? And I think that means that we have to really, all of us collectively embrace media, not just the media that we source, but working actively with Hollywood, with other places that are creating, films. And so how do we seed more narratives and more stories? And how do we showcase more of the people who are the solutionaries who are moving forward? And so we're going to be doing some of that with our company. We're moving from just an education company to a media and education company. We've been making hires in that direction and raising money to do that. But it kind of goes beyond a lot of what just any individual organization can do. It's like we have to embrace that we have to sort of almost saturate a sort of a new paradigm into an ecosystem that allows people to spend time in there. This really empowering them, shaping them, getting them to go deeper in their journey, and also to focus on the solutions, because we're going to have this decade is going to be filled with crisis after crisis. There's just no two ways about it. Whether it's we're in the fire zone in California and we're just going to have fire after fire, and that's we're going to hit a peak on that, and then we're going to have hurricanes coming and collective breakdowns, wars. It's going to be a decade of a lot of crises, and so we have to basically create enough of a context for people to take these crises and turn them into opportunities for evolution. How does California's fire crisis turn into a catalyst, catalyze us to really make the shift to a carbon neutral economy? That's something David Gershon is working on, and I've helped out some with the whole Cool Cities Challenge. So each of these crises becomes a catalyst, but the only way it's a catalyst is if we have sufficient media that's going out that helps to inform people about how to react, so they don't just regress into more more sort of guarded worldviews. Like a lot of the conservative worldview is very deeply suspicious of outsiders. And so you're not going to take seriously something that comes from an Anthony Fauci, because he's part of the other team, right? And so you're only going to trust people from within your sources. I think that some of that is also happening in our movement too, where there's such a deep level of distrust of the sort of more modernist, like CNN style journalism. That's like, oh, we can't trust any of that because they're funded by big pharma, which I think is actually a recipe for real danger and stupidity sometimes. And I think that that's one of the things that we have to, in a way, kind of set a high bar in our movement for discernment, for making sure that what's being produced and propagated is coming from a place that's integrative and holistic, or it can do some real damage. I'll just give an example. My friend Amiel said that he's got his stepfather is in the hospital right now with COVID, and his mother is like basically refuses to get vaccinated because she watched stuff from Christiane Northrup, and so she thinks it's all a hoax or whatever. And he's pretty good chance that he's going to lose his father-in-law and perhaps his mother as well. And so there's a real risk. We have, this personal, I have a brother-in-law who's sort of deep down the conspiracy rabbit hole and really sort of actively anti-mask. He's like, he was opposed to sending his child to school because they were going to require masks as he was going to move out of state. So like that level. So that's where I think it becomes dysfunctional. I think what Joe's talking about is a healthy level of skepticism. There's some deconstruction of mainstream narratives that's important. But if it swings so far that you undermine sort of trust and validity in science and journalism, some of the rigorous practices that have developed that are frankly better than some of what is developed on sort of our alternative sphere. Oftentimes in our alternative sphere, whoever has the microphone just can be very sure of what they're saying and not necessarily have done the level of rigor or background. And so and there's not necessarily a community of accountability that's holding to certain truth standards. So, which is part of why I worked for the Institute of Noetic Sciences for a while, which does have a level of scientific rigor about it. And I think all of us have to really think about like how to sort of, first of all, produce more media, just simply embracing that all of us need to be nodes of media production, because we're sourcing we're kind of helping to drive this new ecosystem. And then to partner effectively with those outlets, those media entities that are open to really bringing this in, and to really look at how do we build this next ecosystem. And so I think that's part of what is important, so that we create full 24/7 media channels that are sourced from an evolutionary perspective. And then that can then feed back in and help to really draw people into this new holistic, sacred kind of worldview in a way that creates a sort of a positive reinforcement, so that they can make this shift that's required collectively within the next decade. So that's probably good enough for a high-level overview, and we'll go to Jean.
Wonderful, Stephen. Thank you. And we're really going to look forward to seeing what you do with the Shift Media platform. So definitely keep us posted about that. So we will now have some words from Jean Houston. So let's hear from Jean.
I'm truly honored to be invited into this circle. I think what we've heard so far is not only brilliant and true, but also nuanced with, what should I say, being transparent to transcendence. And that's the point I would like to take here. I had a very interesting ancestor who had a great deal to say about this. In the early 1860s, he was invited to be one of the generals on the southern side, and he turned it down. His name was Sam Houston, and he wrote a very great letter to the invitees, and he said, the southern, he said, "You can't win." This is before the war. "You cannot win. You have gallantry, you have elegance, you have beauty, but there are things that you lack. You lack the debate. You lack the sense of a deeply changing world. And above all, you lack the lure of becoming for what the world is changing into and what it yet may be." And they said, "Nonsense." And they threw him out as being president of Texas, Sam Houston. And I could almost feel the ghost of my ancestor here as we listened to this, because what he was speaking of is not only what was emerging in the North. He said these people, they are hungry, they're coming over in droves from Europe, they have enormous amounts of energy and purpose. You cannot beat them with your gallantry and your delicacy, beauty. Now, we don't have quite the same problem, but we have something else. And something that has been lacking, I think, in this conversation so far, though so certainly implied. And I would call it the lure of becoming. The lure of becoming, the dream of the time to come, which is something that I believe that our media can very much begin to put into the great stream, the mind stream of the world. What does it look like? How can we put it into practice? Many of you are people who have pursued the domains of consciousness. You know things, you feel things, you live things that a lot of people do not know or think or live. Yes, nuance. Some of you know I spent a lot of time, a year and a half, in the White House, off and on, every other week or so, helping Hillary write a book, among other things. But I had many, I was attending many conversations with Hillary and Bill, the breakfast conversations. And they had a lot of nuance. They were very smart people. They had an enormous sense of complexity, something that we lack in our media today. It's all thrown at you, but the interstices, the what should we call it? The architecture of complexity is not understood. And that's why people then fall into the opposite form. But suppose we were to put into the dream of the time to come. What does the world that is possible really look like? See, if you don't give that, then you fall, as they did in the South, you fall into the opposite, simplicity. We have an enormous sort of raging virus of simplicity and simplification, which is very, very dangerous. I would also remind you, many of you here are students of history, that the pandemics have been recurrent forms throughout history. And what happens is we can look at just at the one in the 19th century in Europe, where half of Europe died. But at the same time, there was a depth going on because it was followed by the rinascita, the renewal, the Renaissance. There's something about times of utter breakdown, chaos, dislocation that are often followed, not simply in the one that we know from Europe, but in the 5 or 6 others that I could mention, but they're followed by the dream of the possible and the acting workmanship in bringing the possible into life. It's as if we are coded by a transcendent function that gives us something of the sensibility of what is needed and begins to bring it into the world, as we saw in the Renaissance and the immense wave of innovation, discovery in art, literature, statecraft that was totally unexpected and inexplicable. I like to believe that we are also on the cusp of rinascita, regeneration, renewal, Renaissance. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What is the lure of becoming? I think that all of you here have a genius for Renaissance. How about that? That's what I've always found with the ELs, a genius for Renaissance. And so I would love to hear, I would love to hear what are the ways that we could put together the dream of time to come? Because it's there, but it's there, essentially taken over by the archons of the internet, who themselves, by very definition, are very limited in their perspective, however brilliant and exciting it is to the viewer. There's something that is more exciting, more evocative, and more true. And I think that the EL community is not only capable of discovering it, you hold a kind of warrant, if you will, to help bring it into time, whether through media, whether through the fact that you offer collectively and singularly online workshops of becoming. I mean, yes, Stephen certainly does that, and many of you here do that. But there may be a way of bringing it together and discovering what is it that truly is latent in us that must be released? What is the readiness of the evolutionary cycle that we are in to emerge? And above all, how can we not only bring it together, but also, much more difficult, hold and keep it together? The lure of the coming manifestation of the dream to come.
Whew. Thank you, Jean,
Awesome, Jean.
for always inspiring us to think beyond our boxes.
Mhm.
I'd just like to hear whether the panelists, so to speak, our discussion leaders, have anything that they would like to respond to one another about. Joe, you were first, so if there's anything you'd like to say about what, in response to what Stephen or Jean has.
Yeah, I made a few notes here. Some of the notes, Stephen, that you actually brought up, I was in my 2 pages of notes that I just didn't get to, but I want to echo it because I think it's very important, which is I do believe as well the mainstream does have significantly higher standards for media and rigor. And one of the challenges that we've found in working within this alternative community, independent community, and finding partnerships that we feel good about is, to be quite honest, the vast majority of them just the standards aren't there. Like there's not a good level of fact checking. There's not a good level of rigor. And so independent media, this is the important point for me, is independent media tends to have a wider breadth of what it's willing to talk about and what it's willing to bring forth that carries meaning for people. That can help them, as Jean mentioned, even project what the future could look like. The challenge is that it can't cross the gap. It can't cross the bridge into an audience that is looking for a certain level of quality, a certain level of rigor. So I just wanted to echo that as an important point as to how much the standards in independent media want to come up. And then to respond to Jean just a little bit, and this is, I think, where it could be a meaningful conversation to see how we can expand on this, is just to offer some personal experience on the sense of projecting that future, which, I mean, I'm going to share like what the challenge has been on our side in doing that type of work with the understanding of where the collective is at this moment. We have like reams of data that look at what bits of content are doing the best across, like, I mean, our content's been viewed by over 1 billion times over the last 12 years. So we have like tons and tons of data to look at. And the interesting thing is it's so hard to have that form of content in our current collective mind get attention. We as a society are so keen on drama. We're so keen on specific types of stories. And I have been trying so hard with our team to figure out how do we capture the attention of people when it comes to these more deeper solutions, when it comes to envisioning a new reality, when it comes to tapping into a feeling of even, can you let go of this world long enough to even envision or imagine what else is possible, and trying to invite people to do that. And what we found is there's a small group of people, like very, very small, who are open to that. And I deeply want to expand that, as I think that's kind of what's being brought forth here. And I have ideas, I won't go into them right now, but I think that's one of the main challenges that I've found is it doesn't gather enough attention. And I'd love to see if we could figure out a way to maybe do that. But yeah, that's what I have to share.
Great reflections. Great reflections, Joe. And if we're going in order, I guess. So I honor that. And I think that we have to kind of create essentially a progression for people where they're sort of like gradually sort of questioning or disconnecting from some of the old patterns and worldviews, and they're entry level, and then they go deeper and deeper over time, because it's, you know, some of the work that Paul Ray did on the shifting of values towards cultural creative, it's like a 10-year process for most people, that they sort of dabble a little bit in yoga, they do a little bit of this, they might do some, you know, a little course, or, and then they gradually get further and further down the path, and then they're sourcing their whole worldview. And so being able to kind of gently lead people along that whole trajectory is, I think, absolutely one of the central tasks of our day. So I honor that you're doing that. And I think that one area that we're starting to explore a little bit more, we did a Shift Film Festival online, and we're doing a Shift Music Festival next month. And sometimes the artists are like the best entry portal. That's part of why we're doing that. We're like, let's sort of showcase more transformational films, and then use that as a gateway. And then there's some other ideas for how do we build on that. But a film kind of creates a little immersive environment that's more compelling, it's story driven, that people can kind of really immerse into a new worldview in a way that also addresses their need for drama and all that. And I think music sort of plays a similar function, in that musicians tend to touch, 10x, 50x the number of people that most of the folks on this call do. And yet a lot of times there's some really powerful transformational spiritual messages that are getting seeded in, but in a form that's more celebratory. And so I think that's part of where we're starting to get creative, is like, how do you work with the artists of the culture in a way that starts to create this entry pathway that then can lead into educational courses and seminars and trainings beyond that it really help them stabilize in a new worldview. So Jean?
Maybe it's educational. Maybe it should have been educational from the beginning. It's a kind of a metaversity, if you will, a metaversity of the internet, and you can say it already exists, but it does not exist as a comprehensive, luminous, engaging, energetic whole. Right. And I think that this is something that we can, if we really put our minds and souls together, we can actually create. So it is a place to go. It is not the place of lostness, which you get on YouTube. You can just wander the universe and you come back, oh, that was fun, and nothing really happens. What are the psychophysical, psychospiritual, interneted initiatives that engage the whole person? And I don't think that has ever been gotten done. It's not advertising. It is a bringing together of a mind force that is now in the field. That's it. We have to look at what is happening in the field of becoming. Again, I think as a historian, but you ride the field that is trying to emerge and not just stay stuck in the one that is dying, you see. And the power of a great deal of television and internet is to bring you to the easiest part, the chewing gum, where you get stuck in the what is. But what is trying to emerge, you don't even put it in an emergent form, you put it as it is there, it is ready for us, we can become part of it. Now you might say, hey, you're trying to create a new world religion. No. It is rather a new world sensibility is just beneath the surface of collective consciousness. And several of you brought up the ideas of collective consciousness. I agree to that. What is it? We are a living body of becoming. And by working from that pattern and perspective, I think a great deal can be put into the field and can begin to become, we are planting a farm of consciousness. What is it that we want to plant? How do we want to tend it? How will it grow? What do we do with the fruit of it? This is where I think we enter in as ELs, because one of the things that ELs do so brilliantly is to rethink the nature of the human journey, who and what we really, really, really are at different levels of our reality, and how to nurture and activate these different levels so the fullness or what is a part of our fullness of our humanity can come forward. I return again to my original thought of the metaversity that is the EL, and to really think about the fact that on one end, we are trying to create, envision, and ultimately help build a world that works. At another end, we are also reactivating the evolutionary potency of our humanity at this time. These are the times we are the people. And I say it again, these are the times and we are the people who have, I think, the power and the purpose and the means, not individually, but together, to help activate this world that is dying to be born in our time, quite literally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean. And thank you so much, Stephen and Joe. This has been such an important conversation for us to have, both as evolutionary leaders and merely as citizens of this planet at this time, at this moment of choice, if I may say so.